September 12, 2025, in the heart of Kyiv, where the distant thud of artillery occasionally interrupts the rhythm of daily life, Ukraine's leadership stepped onto the international stage with renewed clarity. President Volodymyr Zelensky, dressed in his now familiar olive fatigues, addressed the world from the Yalta European Strategy Conference, known simply as YES, a gathering of diplomats, thinkers and journalists where words are often carefully weighed, but where, this time, they struck with sharp purpose. In his speech, Zelensky delivered a message that echoed far beyond the walls of the conference hall. Russia's eastern offensive, he said, has failed. For months, military analysts, satellite imagery, and on-the-ground reports have painted a complicated picture of the war's eastern front. From the forested borders of Sumy to the industrial plains of Pokrovsk, Russia had committed thousands of troops in a renewed push aimed at cracking Ukrainian defences, disrupting logistics, and reclaiming initiative on the battlefield. But according to Ukraine's president, these efforts have faltered. Not only have Russian advances been repelled, they've been repelled decisively. In Zelensky's words, in the east, the situation there is the most difficult right now. There were offensives in the Sumy, Novopavlivka, and Pokrovsk directions. In my opinion, all the offensives that have taken place over the past 2 months by Russia have failed, and they are beaten, and they are well aware of this. This wasn't a moment of boastful triumph. Rather, it was a carefully crafted signal to allies, adversaries, and citizens that Ukraine, despite facing one of the most relentless military machines of the 21st century, is holding its ground. But what does it actually mean when a military offensive fails? Is it measured by the number of kilometers gained or the lives lost trying to gain them? Is it defined by a retreat or by the silent admission that further attacks are futile? In military terms, a failed offensive can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it's a withdrawal under pressure. Other times it's the inability to breach defensive lines despite massive effort. What Ukraine claims has happened in the east is the latter. Russia's forces, despite months of preparation and surging troop numbers, have failed to dislodge Ukrainian defenders entrenched in these regions. Sumy, a region that lies precariously close to the Russian border, has seen repeated incursions, probing attacks, missile strikes, and sabotage attempts, yet none of them have led to sustained control. In Novopavlivka, situated in the Donetsk Oblast, Russian armoured divisions attempted to push westward, but met a well-organised resistance force supported by drone reconnaissance and precise artillery coordination. And in Pokrovsk, a city that has seen both humanitarian struggle and military significance, the Russian push was met with a wall of steel, both literal and symbolic. The failure of these offensives, according to Kyiv, is not merely tactical, it is strategic. Russia invested months preparing for a surge meant to regain momentum. Instead, they found themselves bogged down, taking heavy losses and unable to achieve meaningful breakthroughs. And Zelensky's comments come at a time when Ukraine desperately needs to show progress, not only on the battlefield, but in the halls of its Western partners. The YES conference, funded by the Viktor Pinchuk Foundation, is more than just an annual gathering. It is a message board to the West, a platform where Ukraine's leaders remind allies of the stakes, the sacrifices, and the urgency. The president's bold declaration serves multiple purposes. Domestically, it boosts morale. For a population enduring daily air raid sirens and the emotional toll of a protracted war, hearing their leader speak with confidence that the enemy is not winning is no small thing. Internationally, it serves as a justification for continued aid, military, economic, and humanitarian. Ukraine is not asking for support in vain. It's using that support effectively. Yet, even as Zelensky speaks of failed Russian offensives, he remains clear-eyed about the cost. The Eastern Front is still, in his words, the most difficult theatre of this war. It is where trenches stretch for miles, where artillery duels rage for hours, where lives are measured in meters of ground gained or held. The situation, say analysts, is reminiscent of a hybrid between 20th century trench warfare and modern drone-enabled combat. Both sides rely heavily on unmanned systems, from reconnaissance drones to loitering munitions, yet the core of the fighting remains painfully human. Soldiers endure brutal conditions, mud-caked boots, sleepless nights, and constant shelling. They fight in shattered villages and forests turned to ash. The failure of Russia's offensive does not mean peace is near, only that for now the defenders stand tall. Meanwhile, Russia has remained officially silent on the Ukrainian claim of failure. But independent military tracking supports the notion of stagnation. Visual evidence shows destroyed Russian armour, stalled convoys and defensive posturing where offensive movement was expected. Casualty reports, while unconfirmed, suggest high losses, especially among newly conscripted units rushed to the front. All of this raises an uncomfortable question for Moscow. At what point does persistence become futility? And for Ukraine, how long can the defenders hold without fresh support from abroad? Zelensky, ever mindful of this balance, uses platforms like Yes not just to speak about military realities, but to underscore the existential nature of this war. For him, and for much of Ukraine, this isn't about East versus West. It's about sovereignty, identity, and the refusal to submit to imperial pressure. His choice of words, "they are beaten," is a psychological strike as much as a military one. He knows those words will echo in Russian ears, in command centres, briefing rooms, and even in the Kremlin. They are meant to sow doubt, to challenge morale, to assert not only battlefield resilience, but narrative control. Yet optimism remains tempered. Zelensky has learned over the course of this long war that victories are never final. A failed offensive can be followed by a renewed one. A temporary advantage can be reversed. That is why his speech, while firm, avoided exaggeration. There was no claim of total defeat for Russia, only acknowledgement of their most recent failure. This distinction is critical. It reveals Ukraine's broader strategy, endurance, not victory at any cost, not blind offensives, but a sustained defence designed to outlast and outmaneuver an enemy that has greater numbers, but not necessarily greater resolve. As winter approaches, both sides will again face logistical nightmares, frozen ground, power outages, humanitarian crises. And yet, the lines in the east may harden rather than shift. Russia may pivot to other fronts or regroup for spring. Ukraine will fortify, rotate troops, and continue to seek advanced weaponry from abroad. But the story Zelensky told at YES 2025, the message that captured headlines, was not one of fatigue. It was one of resistance. Russia tried to break the east. It failed. That single sentence, and they are well aware of this, is not just a statement of fact. It is a challenge to the Russian command, to the global community, and even to his own people. It's a reminder that in war, perception shapes momentum. And right now, Ukraine is signaling strength. In a conflict that often feels like a grinding stalemate, moments like these, statements like these, matter. They shift the emotional tide. They remind us that in the fog of war, clarity still emerges, that the front lines are not just about tanks and trenches, but about voices that refuse to fall silent. And in Kyiv, on that September day, Volodymyr Zelensky's voice carried across borders, not with the promise that the war is over, but with the conviction that, for now, the line holds. In the east, the situation there is the most difficult right now. There were offensives in the Sumy, Novopavlivka and Pokrovsk directions. In my opinion, all the offensives that have taken place over the past 2 months by Russia have failed, and they are beaten, and they are well aware of this.
2 місяці провалені Росією, і вони розбиті. Вони це чітко усвідомлюють. Тому